Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about palettes that I have decluttered and completely forgotten about. I had to go through several of my videos from over the years to find palettes that I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I got rid of that because it's completely left my brain. So I thought it'd be fun to bring up palettes that, basically I didn't like enough to keep in my collection, but I think it'll be interesting to bring these up and be like, yeah, there's a reason why they're gone. So maybe you'll have forgotten about some of these palettes too. Okay, the first one on my list is the Lorac Mega Pro 2 palette. I picked this up in the US at Ulta because I had been so sad that I didn't get my hands on the Mega Pro 1. And really, I don't know why I was so obsessed with the Mega Pro 1. I think it was solely for that one cranberry shade in there that I thought made the whole palette exciting. But because I hadn't gotten that palette and Mega Pro 2 was out, I was like, okay, I want to snap this up because I missed out on the other one and, I feel like a little bit of a collector, in terms of palettes at the time. And so I grabbed it. What a boring freaking palette. There's nothing inherently wrong with the shadows from what I remember. I think they were on the softer side of things overall and they are quite neutral. But there's nothing exciting about this palette. There's nothing in there that I look at now and was like, absolutely, I need to have it. And I don't know why I wanted to pick it up so badly when I did, because there's nothing exciting about it. And I think that's mostly going to be true of a lot of the palettes that I discuss in this video. But there was a time where I was just buying up all the palettes because they were new launches and therefore I thought that that's what made them exciting. But fundamentally, a lot of the color stories just aren't very me, and even though I grabbed them, they were just obviously not ones that I was going to be using very often. Pretty much any palettes that I've picked up that have too many browns in it just end up being palettes that I don't reach for very often. So anyway, Lorac Mega Pro 2 palette, I got rid of that I think several years ago now, and honestly I completely forgot that it even used to be in my collection until I was going through these videos. So that is a palette that I clearly have not missed whatsoever. Okay, sticking with Lorac, I have to talk about the Unzipped Gold palette. I guess I just didn't really get along with Lorac palettes. I bought them because other people were buying them and they were raving about them, but I never really fell in love with the brand. So the Unzipped Gold palette, my friend Sam loved this thing to pieces. I believe her palette ended up looking really beaten up, which I always think is exciting in makeup because I like to see used and abused palettes because it means you love them. And I know she raved about it, she loved the quality, she used it all the time, and I was like, okay, I want to try it out. So I picked it up and just never fell in love with it. And I at the time I should have known better, but I don't wear a lot of gold eyeshadow. In general, I tend to think it doesn't look quite right on me. The tones of golds that are generally in palettes aren't ones that I enjoy, and I think it's very rare for me to find a gold that actually works. For me, I tend to like things that are a little bit more like pale yellow based, with a bit of a green edge, and gold in general just doesn't normally look like that. They tend to be a little bit more richer and a little bit more on the warm side of things. And even though I really like warm toned eyeshadows, there's something about a warm toned gold that I don't know, it doesn't really appeal to me. So this palette, in essence, had a few gold shades in it that didn't really work for me, and then it had a whole bunch of like matte colors as well that were just like neutral tones that you're supposed to like blend out with, or outer corner colors, and I just about it. I never fell in love with it. It became like a dust collector in my collection, so I did get rid of it and I never thought about it again. And honestly, I think those are the only two Lorac palettes that I've only ever owned in my life, and after that experience with them, just them not really working for me and not falling in love with the shadows, I just kind of like, think I'm kind of done with Lorac. And honestly, I can't think of them putting out anything anymore. Are they even still at Ulta? I have no idea. Oh, the next palette, the Too Faced Love palette. Okay, so I got it at a blogger swap when I was at the height of my Too Faced obsession. I just wanted to own all of their palettes and I was so excited, and I saw this at a blogger swap and I was like, yes, give me that palette. And I knew it was ugly when I grabbed it, but I just wanted to own them all. And honestly, this palette is just absolute freaking garbage. I think they did it for their 15th anniversary as a brand. I think that's what the whole reason of this palette was. And there's just way too much shimmer in there. First of all, way too much shimmer, not enough matte colors, and the payoff and quality of these shadows is just totally subpar. Like, not even on the same normal level for Too Faced, who, in my opinion, has generally done eyeshadow fairly well. I don't think like they're at the best that I've ever used in my life, but they are certainly nowhere near the bottom in terms of like quality. But there's something just horrifically wrong with this palette. Like, the shadows just don't work, the color tones are weird, there's too much shimmer overall, and the shape of the pans. I know they were going for something like cutesy, and they wanted to be like, oh, hearts and all that kind of stuff, because that is very Too Faced overall. But the pans just don't make any sense. Like, the heart at least is a little bit bigger so you can get your brush in there, but like the weird half triangle slices are just awkward to use. I mean, I'd genuinely be curious to see if somebody's ever panned this palette, because I can't imagine being able to get into the crevices very well. Like, I just, no, not appealing. I didn't like the look of the top of the palette either, with that whole love and bow thing. Oh God, what a terrible palette. Yeah, no regrets on getting rid of that one for sure. And in fact, that probably sticks out as one of my most disliked palettes in my collection, just because the overall aesthetic of it was just crap. The Tarte Rainforest After Dark palette. My friend in the US, Kat, picked this up for me, and one for herself too, and then I think she either shipped it to me or gave it to me when I went to go visit her one time, because I don't feel like it was available in Canada when it first launched. Anyway, I really wanted to get my hands on it because it's one where Tarte was releasing those disc packaging palettes that were really appealing. I had missed out on the Aqua Lilies palette and really regretted it, even though that palette is very pale neutral overall. The thing that was appealing to me in it, I think, was that coral blush and then the bright blue minty aqua kind of color that really drew me to the palette, but that thing was sold out by the time I decided to buy it. So when Tarte released the Rainforest After Dark palette, I knew I wanted it just because I didn't want to miss out on another disc palette. It was convenient in the sense that it had a bronzer, a highlighter, and a blush. The blush was really good. I like that, and I genuinely love Tarte blushes to this day. They're some of my favorites in my collection. But the eyeshadows, while they were okay, just to me never really provided enough variety. And this palette also had the same issue where there was a gold in there that just didn't really work for me and I didn't enjoy. The matte shadows were fine, but I feel like they were a little bit chalky / dusty and just really didn't provide enough color payoff. So I wanted to love this palette desperately. I remember bringing it with me on vacation one time and just being like, oh, I don't really like the looks that are coming out of this. But I tried hard to love this thing, and while I have fond memories of my friend buying it for me and, you know, her giving it to me, I don't know if she gifted it to me or if I paid her for it, but it was a nice gesture of her to pick it up for me, and I wanted to keep it because of that. Then I was like, this is stupid. Like, don't keep products just because they have a particular, like, good memory attached to it. You can if you want, but for me it just didn't make any sense because it was taking up, you know, space in my collection that I just didn't have anymore. So that one was a little bit of a bomb overall. I think I might have liked it initially, but over time it lost its like specialness to me. Smashbox Double Exposure Palette. Okay, this one was sent to me by PR. I think it was the first time I ever got Smashbox PR, and I was pumped to get this thing. I was like, oh cool, like it was a new launch at the time. I did I think a 5-look kind of blog post with it, and I liked the quality of it. It was good. The shadows blended really well. The tones were a good mix in that palette. It had warm tones and cool tones, which was nice because you don't generally get both sides of it in a palette. You might get like a warm palette with like a pop of blue, or you might get like a cool tone palette with like one warm shade in it. I don't tend to love that kind of combination, but this one had enough cool tones and enough warm tones that it was cohesive enough of a palette to use depending on which side of the spectrum you want to go. However, there's nothing unique about the actual shadows in there, and that's fundamentally why I ended up getting rid of the palette, because even though it worked out nicely, I had those colors like 100 times over in different palettes, and there was nothing especially enticing about the particular layout of this color story. I'm very drawn to palettes that have like a good layout and a good, like, how do I even say it? Like, I want to say a crescendo of color kind of thing, where it goes from light to dark kind of thing, and they're just like beautiful tones, almost like a rainbow or like a monochromatic like hue gradient kind of thing. This was laid out fine, but there was nothing inherently special about it. The colors were adequate, but available everywhere else. The shades themselves, in terms of layout, were fine, but nothing special. Even though this worked out so well as a palette, there was nothing special about it enough for me to want to keep it. So that is essentially why I got rid of it. And I think I've mentioned this already, but like, if something is too commonly neutral, and I know I've got those shades in like other palettes, I just don't see the point in keeping them in one palette when I can reach for other ones and get the exact same look. So this one left my collection a few years ago now, and honestly, I never really thought about it. And none of these palettes I've thought about since I got rid of, which is a good thing. It means I've decluttered appropriately. But yeah, I think that was one of the more like, out of my brain as soon as I got rid of it kind of thing. Next up, the Urban Decay Urban Spectrum palette. I think the colors in this palette are really pretty. There's something very gravitating towards this palette. The purples and the blues, there's a lot of good tones in there. The problem is that I think every single one of these shadows is shimmery. Like I'm looking at it on my screen right now, I'm pretty sure there's not a single matte to be had in this palette, which is just problematic. I'm still surprised to this day that when this was released, which was several years ago now, that Urban Decay didn't have the foresight or the knowledge to think of like, maybe we should put some matte shadows in this palette. Like it seemed weird. And I had put looks together with it, but I'm not a fan of a full shimmery eye. So it was always kind of like, okay, I can't just use this palette by itself, which, you know, can be something that some people like doing. But in general, if I'm using a palette, I want to stick to that one without having to reach for 100 other things. So even though I like the shadows in there, it was all too shimmery. There was also way too many neutral colors that I wasn't going to enjoy. And even though my eye was drawn to the greens and the blues and the purples, there's like 5 or 6 shadows in there that are neutral in tone that I just never touched because there was no point. If I'm reaching for a colorful palette, I'm going to use the colors. And the other problem with this packaging or palette was the packaging. It was this god-awful like lift-off top that looked pretty, sure, but you took the lid off and then you're left with like this flat palette, and then you gotta like, I don't know, lug it around. It just wasn't particularly convenient. When you take that lid off, it's not connected, so you have to put it somewhere, and then it's taking up space on your desk, and I just thought the whole thing was ridiculous. I believe their intention was that you could pull out the eyeshadow pans and then have like a jewelry box afterwards, but like, okay, first of all, who is going through eyeshadows at the rate that you would finish this entire thing and then be able to use it as a jewelry box? No chance. Like, zero chance. There's way too much eyeshadow in there to even consider that. You could use this for like every day for a year and you probably still wouldn't finish the dang palette. So I just thought the palette packaging was ridiculous. The color story, while pretty, just functionally did not work, and it broke my heart a little bit to get rid of it because I did like the colors so much. But at the end of the day, I forgot about it. So, you know, it was a good decision to get rid of it. Okay, next up. This one's a little bit more of a recent one in comparison to some of the ones that I've talked about, but I mean, it's still kind of old. The Too Faced White Peach palette. What a stinking letdown that thing was. I picked it up because I love the Just Peachy Mattes palette, and I was like, yay, they're launching more peach stuff. Why not support it? Because I just love that stuff. That palette was just awful. Just awful. I don't know how anybody could wear that palette that isn't like super fair skinned. Like there's no way. There's one black shadow in there. Fine. That'll deepen some things up. But all of the other colors in there are basically pale. They're not even like mid-tone colors. They are pale, pale, pale transition colors, or like lid colors that are pale and shimmery. And I think there was like 4 or 5 mattes that were all like a little bit of a hint of a different color. Like there was like a brown with a hint of peach. There was a brown with a hint of orange, and like a brown with a hint of pink. And did I ever say that one? I don't know. But fundamentally, the colors just didn't look that different on the eyes. And it was one of those things was like, did you not like quality control test this in some respect? Because somebody putting this on their face for a few days in a row would realize that half the colors are basically identical. And if they might show up on somebody who's fair skinned and show a little bit of a hint of difference, that's only the fair skin color. Like, what happens to the person who's a mid-tone color trying to wear these shades and they all look identical? Like, it's totally worthless. There was only one shadow I think that I liked in this one, and it was like a pale orange shimmery color that was great for the lid, but I think that was the only color I liked in there. So this palette had basically pale tones for the whole thing, and then one black shadow, and then this weird shimmery darkish purple that just didn't make any sense. Like if that had been a matte color, this palette might have actually worked out a little bit better, but it was shimmery, so I just was like, what were you thinking? Anyway, I'm not sad I got rid of that. I'm just sad that it turned out to be so garbage. Okay, the last palette I have to talk about is the Tarte Tarteist Pro Remix palette. Oh, I was drawn to this palette because there's a lot of really solid colors in there. But as with the Urban Spectrum palette, they were almost all shimmers. And I get that there's people out there who just wear shimmery colors for eyeshadows, but I really don't think it provides enough variety to the average consumer. Like, at the very least, split it half and half, you know, like have half mattes, half shimmers, but to have, was the whole bloody thing shimmery? There might have been 2 mattes in the whole thing. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. To have so much on one focus, like shimmers in this palette, just, I don't think the average consumer enjoys it. I could be wrong. I'm definitely coming at it from the perspective of what I enjoy putting on my face, and I prefer mattes, but I like some shimmers in the mix. When something is fully shimmery, I'm just like, okay, now what? And I was drawn to the colors in this. There's a gorgeous turquoise in there. There's a great blue, purple, and like a deep cranberry color. But the rest of the shades are actually quite neutral in tone. And it always really screws with my head when I see really bright colors in there, and I'm like, that's what I'm drawn to. And then I start playing with the palette, and then I realize more than half the colors are actually neutral. I just didn't realize it because I wasn't looking at that. The other thing that also really pissed me off about this palette was the fact that this was sort of like the successor to the Tarteist Pro palette, which had, I think it was like 20 matte shadows or 16 matte shadows, and then a row of shimmers that were the circular colors. With this palette, they just threw that idea out the window. So there's shimmers like mixed in everywhere. So it doesn't really have any kind of cohesive sense. Like, why are there square pans and round pans when you've got shimmers in both of them? Like, the quality is not different in them. They're just like haphazardly placed about. Versus with the Tarteist Pro palette, you had just the shimmers as the circular pans, and then the square pans were all mattes. So that made sense. And this one was just like, the hell were you thinking? I feel like they just had leftover formulas from some other palettes or something, and they just jammed it into this thing. And part of the reason that I think that too is because this is repurposed packaging. Like, the top of the lid can actually be peeled off, and underneath it is the original Pro palette by Tarte. And the same thing's true of like on the inside too, like, you know, that spattered kind of color thing. If you pull them off where the shadow names are, the Pro is underneath that. So this was a repurposed palette packaging for sure, but I don't understand why they did this with the shadows. It just seemed really freaking weird. And the other thing too is like the front color splash pattern on the outside of the packaging made me think that those colors were going to be on the inside, and they're not really. Like, I just don't feel like the cover translates to the inside very well. So that was another palette that I got rid of and never thought of again, which is inherently true of every single palette that I've talked about in this video. So that is it for this video. Those are a whole bunch of palettes that I decluttered and then never thought of again. It was kind of funny to talk about them again because I really haven't given them much thought since I got rid of them. So to like dig up my memories of why I got rid of them was kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. Thanks for joining me today, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye.